Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Now What podcast, episode 3. My name is Glenn Sharp. I am the president and CEO of Sharp Leadership Development. If you have been following along with episodes 1 and 2, you know that I wrote a book called Now What. It's the journey of Johnny. It's a 4-month coaching journey where I am coaching Johnny, who's a brand new manager. He was an amazing mechanic, so amazing that they made him the manager of mechanics. Hence the title, Now What? Now what do I do, Glenn? Because he's not doing the things that got him promoted. Instead, he's managing personalities, he's doing performance appraisals, he is counseling employees, and he is overwhelmed. So in the 4-month coaching journey, we started off with changing the way Johnny thinks. I've got to get him thinking like a manager. So I introduce you guys to the results cone. In the second episode, we started talking about a little bit more tactical aspects of Johnny's job, and that is proactive versus reactive, and how important it is to do most of the work up front rather than waiting and hoping or reacting. We also talked a little bit about investing your time versus spending your time. Are you spending time on the tasks that you should? Well, continuing on that track in the tactical portion of Johnny's job, today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. All right, this is the American Management Association's definition of emotional intelligence. So you see the two categories, with me and with others. With me, do I understand myself? And more importantly, can I manage my behavior? So for example, who cares if I know I'm a hothead if I cannot manage my temper? All right, so unbelievably important. The second portion of emotional intelligence is with others. So do I understand others? And can I manage that social relationship? So I'll ask classes, does anyone here have a best friend? And of course, lots of people raise their hand. And I tell them, keep your hand raised if you've caught your best friend stretching the truth, lying, whatever you want to call it. And of course, lots of laughter ripples through the audience. And I asked one individual, like, how did you know your best friend was lying to you? And basically, after a little bit of discussion, they say, well, they made a face, or they said something weird, and it didn't sound right. So for example, one particular person told me they started stuttering, right? And they started talking slow and searching, and usually they're really eloquent and a wordsmith. And that's really their brain trying to think up some stuff and giving, the mouth giving their brain enough time for them to come up with a creative solution or a lie in this particular case. But the point is that they knew them. They knew them really, really well. And that's why they noticed the facial expressions. That's why they noticed when the person wasn't acting right. That's emotional intelligence. And what I want Johnny to know, and I want you guys to know, is how important it is to use emotional intelligence. As you start to become a manager and as you work your way up through the ranks, emotional intelligence takes on more of a prominent role than IQ. And by the way, emotional intelligence is EQ, not EI, right? It's emotional quotient. You don't say II, you say IQ. So if anybody says EI, they don't know what they're talking about, so please walk away. But EQ, emotional intelligence, is such an important part of management because now you're influencing people, now you're managing personalities, right? And you're doing a lot less of the tactical portion of your job. And that's one of the biggest surprises that people realize when they become managers, is how important emotional intelligence is. So in that spirit, I'm going to cover with you emotional intelligence in the context of Myers-Briggs. These are the 4 dichotomies of Myers-Briggs, and this is kind of a strange icon, but it shows the 4 dichotomies. If you'll notice, you've got extrovert, introvert, sensor, intuitor, thinker, feeler, judging, perceiving. What I do with Johnny and what I want to do with you guys is I want to make sure you understand the context to which these 4 dichotomies apply to management, apply to work. So I want to go over all of them with you and make sure that you get some tips, tricks, and tidbits in regards to how to use these, because most people stop at the definition of these, but they don't talk about application. So let's talk about the first dichotomy, extrovert, introvert. If I asked you, that person is an extrovert, what do you think they're like? Well, of course, most of you will say they're talkative, they're social, you definitely know what they're feeling, right? And then if I asked you, that person's an introvert, what do you think they're like? You'll probably say reserved, quiet, right? They kind of keep to themselves. Well, one of the things that's interesting about extrovert, introvert is there is no connection between extrovert, introvert, and intelligence. A lot of people think just because someone can talk, that means they're intelligent. And if you've walked the earth more than 5 minutes, you know just because you can talk doesn't mean you should talk. Right? But for you introverts out there, I'm going to challenge you right now, and I want you to ask yourselves the following question. Fair or unfair, what do you think people think of you if you don't talk? Right? And I'll ask an audience that, and the interesting part about this is the looks on their faces, because they're kind of surprised by the question. But I'll repeat it. What do you think people think of you when you don't talk, fair or unfair? And to their surprise, many of them will say they don't care, they're indifferent. I've even heard people say they're dumb. Once again, there is no distinction, right? There is no connection between intelligence and extrovert and introvert. Just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're not smart. It means you're just processing internally. That's all. But how does this apply to work? Because that's great, you know the definitions, but what I want you guys to think about is, for example, introverts. You must manage introverts differently than you would manage extroverts. For example, in a particular meeting, if you have 10 people in a meeting, if you're honest with yourselves, how many people really dominate the meeting? Probably 1 or 2, at tops 3. Well, if you have 2 or 3 people dominating the meeting, good luck with everyone else injecting their reasoning, injecting their opinions in there. So as a manager, you have to be able to control the room, and you have to say things like, hold on. Mike, I want to know what you think. If Mike's an introvert and quiet, I want to stop everybody and go to Mike and get his opinion. Right? Otherwise, Mike's going to be drowned out by all the other extroverts out there. Conversely, with extroverts, one of the things that you can do, and this relates very easily to the proactive versus reactive, if you have one particular person on your team that typically dominates the conversation, maybe you have a proactive conversation with them even before the meeting and let them know, hey, listen, I need you in particular to let these guys speak, all right? So that when I prompt you, please let these guys speak. Do not interrupt them until they're finished. Can you promise me that? And that would be you controlling the room, controlling the meeting room. Right? And that's the way extroverts and introverts, that's the way they interact, and that's the way you have to manage that interaction. The second dichotomy is sensing versus intuitor. And a sensor, this is a very general way to explain it, but a sensor is someone who's very, very aware of their surroundings. They're very much into the detail, the who, the what, the why, the when. Right? They are definitely the people that are going to ask lots of questions, and they're going to want to know the particulars about a particular topic. Right? A intuitor is a lot different. Intuitor, 30,000 foot view, big picture. Right? They just want the nuts and bolts. Tell me what success looks like. Right? They don't need all the particulars. And how this relates to management is, when you're managing a sensor, you cannot just assume that they're trying to be annoying by asking lots of questions. Right? They need to know those answers. They need to ask those questions. That's just the way they process information. Right? And an intuitor, a little bit different. An intuitor, for many individuals, they don't realize that they just need to know what success looks like. I'm an intuitor, right? But I am not an off-the-charts intuitor. I'm pretty much in the slight category. But imagine if I am your boss and I'm an intuitor and you are my employee and you're a sensor. And I say to you, hey, I need you to do this, this, and this on the project, and everything else is up to you. Now, for a sensor, especially someone who's off the charts, they're going to overthink that. And I don't understand as an intuitor. What I'm saying to you as an intuitor is the only 3 things that have to be part of this project are the ones that I listed. I trust you with everything else. And that has to be explicit. And you need to make sure you develop that trust with them. Because if that's not explicit, a sensor, you're going to cause more harm than good. They're going to overthink things. They're going to wonder, why wouldn't you give me all that information? And nothing could be further from the truth in regards to the crazy stuff that they might think. They might think, oh God, maybe he doesn't trust me with it. Couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I absolutely trust you with it. That's why I'm only giving you a couple of key things that need to be met, right? And that's one of the things that you have to realize. Conversely, if you're a sensor, please do not send me a 2-page single-spaced email. I'm not reading it. Just give me the high-level stuff. If I have questions, I'll ask for more. But you do not have to give me every single thought, every single detail. I don't want it and I don't need it. So this falls under the realm of, if you want to influence someone, who's more important, you or them? And the answer is them. The next dichotomy is thinking versus feeling. And this is a little bit interesting for me anyway, because so many people think wild thoughts about the two of these. So let's talk about a thinker. I'm a thinker, but actually, a very clear thinker. Basically, a thinker in this context is someone who bases their decisions more on logic and data than they do on emotion. That does not mean they don't have emotion. That means they base it more on logic and data. So, for example, if you come to me and you say, "Oh God, Glenn, the company right now, morale is at its lowest level, and people are leaving in droves," I'm going to look at some of the data, or I will actually talk to a few people first before I just take your word for it. I might look in the computer and see, of the 10,000 employees that we have, 2 people left in the last month. That doesn't mean everyone's leaving in droves. I'm going to rely more on data than I do emotion. Someone who's a feeler is going to rely more on emotion than they will logic and data. Again, that does not mean they don't have logic and data in them. That means that they'll say things like, for example, "Hey, we need to celebrate. These guys are tired." Or they'll talk a little bit about work-life balance. They'll say things like, "Hey, listen, we need to make sure that we talk to these guys because they feel like they're not being heard." Right? That's the feeler. And the cool part about this is, especially managing this, is if I have someone on my team that is a feeler, I'll rely on them to give me their opinion, because sometimes I can get tunnel vision. Sometimes I can rely more on data and logic, and I can forget the people aspect of things. And I'll ask someone, "Hey, was that a little rough what I just said?" And they'll take me aside into a quiet place, and they'll say, "Yeah, maybe you could have softened that up a tad," right? And that's obviously someone I trust, but that's someone who actually thinks a little differently than I do. And I think that's strong. I think that makes for a really strong relationship and a really strong team when you have people who think a little bit different. I always tease my wife, Laurel. I say, together we make a full brain. Because I'm more in the thinking category, she's more in the feeling category. Together, we have a really good hold of the two different categories, because she reminds me when I have to soften things up a little bit. I remind her, "Hey, you have to toughen up a little bit." And it makes for a great relationship and a great team. The final dichotomy is judging versus perceiving. And this is kind of a weird one because most of the time when you ask somebody or say to someone, that person's a judger, that's a derogatory term, right? That's not what this means. Say, for example, I give you a assignment, and the assignment is due in 30 days. And the assignment is, say, you have to build a new wing onto your existing corporate office, right? Something you know a little bit about, but you're not an expert on. 30 days from now, you are going to present your plan to not only your boss, but your boss's boss's boss. And your job depends on it. What you do as soon as we conclude that meeting determines whether or not you're in the judging or perceiving category. So for example, if you look at the graphic, if most of the work is done up front, right, you have at least have to do an outline, but the biggest part, the biggest thrust of your work is done in the beginning. You might tweak it a little bit along the way, but most is done up front, and then at 30 days you are completed. You're probably more in the judging category. You kind of jump right in. If you go to lunch or you forget about it for a couple of days, maybe you read a book, maybe you talk to some people, you do some research, you think it through, right? Toward the end, you'll do the work toward the end, maybe after you do your research, or maybe you had a chance to ponder it. But you still get it done in 30 days. You just have a different approach to doing it. If that's you, you're probably more in the perceiving category. You're a little more discerning, a little more thoughtful, right? That's a good thing. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that. But you notice there's two different approaches here. I want you to imagine, though, how this would look in business as a manager. Imagine if I'm your manager and I'm a very clear judging category. I'm very clear in the judging category. And you as my employee are very clear in the perceiving category. And maybe we draw a line through the middle of this page, right? Horizontally. Right? At 2 weeks, I ask you, hey, how's the project going? And you look at me and you say, well, I've been thinking about it. What do you think I'm going to say in return to that? I'll probably say something like, well, I've been thinking about firing you too. What do you mean you've been thinking about it? Now, obviously, I'm joking, but can you imagine someone like me who's deep into the judging category being frustrated with someone who's just thinking about it? And I might say to that person in the beginning, before the project, listen, I get it. You're a perceiver. I get it. You're thoughtful. You're going to do your research. I understand. But you have to understand, from my perspective, I at least need to know where you're at. So once a week, can we touch base and you let me know what your plan is, where you're at in regards to the project, so at least I can ease my mind, right? That would be a good relationship. That would be understanding each other, right? And now, again, together, we could make a really good team. I could kind of light a fire under you and get a sense of urgency, and you can slow me down a little bit and say, boss, maybe we should think about this a little bit. Let's take the weekend. Let's take overnight to kind of think it through, right? So that is what judging versus perceiving from a very general standpoint looks like. So going back to the 4 dichotomies of Myers-Briggs, this is really what emotional intelligence looks like, but this is also what I mean when I talk to classes about diversity. I teach diversity of thoughts. Right? I think if most people kind of understood each other and understood why they think a certain way, they might not agree, but at least they understand that that person's not trying to be annoying when they're quiet. That person's not trying to be a jerk when they just focus on logic and data. That person's not trying to delay things just because they're asking for the weekend to think about it. That's just the way people process information. Right? I'll tell you something funny. I get asked at the end of classes every once in a while, do you do marriage counseling? And of course, my answer is, hell no, I don't do marriage counseling. I'm not qualified for that. But I understand the premise of the question. Right? Wouldn't it be interesting to know this about your significant other before you got married? Again, understanding why they act that way. Not necessarily agreeing with it, but making sure that you understand the why behind their actions. Just as a funny story, my wife Laurel and I are a little bit different. I am, very clear in the judging category, as you guys know. She's very clear in the perceiving category. And this is kind of the way it works, both at work and personally, right? Whenever we argue, right, I'm really good at debating. I grew up in New York and a bunch of extroverts in our family, and I can kind of debate with the best of them, right? She is not great at debating. She needs to process information. Right? Again, doesn't mean she's not smart. She's incredibly smart, but she gets kind of tongue-tied because she's not good at that. Right? So I'll win the arguments. However, after about 3 days, when she does her research, when she thinks about it and she gets her thoughts together, she'll say things like, hey, baby, can you come in here and talk to me? I got something to tell you. Then she destroys me, because now she gets her thoughts together. And that's one of the things I want you guys to think about, and kind of our final little tip for managing folks. Imagine if you knew someone was both an introvert and a perceiver. Can you imagine you surprising them in the middle of a meeting and saying, hey, Mike, tell everybody what you told me the other day? That person might be completely appalled. Number one, they don't want to get up there and speak in front of people. But number two, if Mike is also a perceiver, he might not be good at that. He might really falter because he just needs to get his ducks in a row. He needs to kind of get his thoughts organized. Instead of doing that to Mike, can you imagine how much more effective it would be for you to say to Mike, maybe on a Wednesday, there's a Friday meeting coming up on a Wednesday, you say to Mike, listen, I want you to put some notes together. I want you to talk to the team. You don't have to stand up. You can read your notes, right? There's no reason why you have to actually make it formal. But I want you to tell them what you told me, because I think a lot of people could benefit from what you did. You would get such a better product out of Mike if you just understood who he was and how he processes information. So that's a little bit about emotional intelligence. I hope you enjoyed episode 3. Obviously, there's a lot to emotional intelligence. We'll explore facets of emotional intelligence in coming episodes, and we'll probably dedicate a couple of more in the future to EQ because it's so important, and it's such a prominent certification, a prominent class that I have in my arsenal. So thank you guys for your attention. I appreciate you very much. Hopefully you guys will pick up the book. You can obviously pick it up on Amazon. It's available on ebook and paperback, and pretty soon on Audible. Thank you guys for your attention. Have a great day, and good luck with your leadership and management journey.